Well, good evening. My name is Paul Douglas. It's May the 5th, 2022, and I'd like to welcome you to the inaugural edition of the Mormon Podcast. I appreciate the fact that you've chosen to be here this evening, and I hope that you'll find this episode worthwhile. Just a couple of things by way of preamble before we jump into the content of tonight's episode. First of all, why the podcast? I've created this podcast because I believe that many, if not most popular post-Mormon themed websites and podcasts contain a confirmation bias reflective, if not of the atheistic beliefs of the hosts, certainly of the preponderance of people who view those sites. It's been my observation and experience, in fact, that whenever God or Christianity in particular pops up in the discussion, there's a kind of dismissive rhetoric that takes place. And in many cases, it deteriorates into ad hominems. Having said that, I don't want to suggest that these websites don't contain valuable content. They do, of course. I don't want anyone to think that this is an attempt to assail the character of people such as John DeLynn or Bill Reel. Not at all. I think these are men of courage and character that have proved themselves through the content and over the years on these websites by presenting important topics that have made a difference in the post-Mormon community. Nor do I hold the view that somehow people who identify as atheists lack a moral compass. Not at all. Many of the atheists I've known in life could shame many of us, certainly myself, when it comes to goodness and integrity. This podcast has no agenda beyond that which I've just stated. It's not a vehicle for proselyting or presenting any or promoting any particular religious point of view, either Christian or non-Christian, theist or atheist, or anything in between. Nor is this meant to be an ex-Mormon Christian site. Not at all. There's many good sites out there that are serving that community very well right now. I don't know what, if anything, this will morph into. Well, obviously the audience of this site is post or ex-Mormon. I'm hoping that perhaps true believing Mormons or even their apologists may feel that they can come to this site for a respectful discussion of the reasons why they believe what they do in terms of their Mormonism, in the face of what many of us in the post-Mormon community feel is compelling evidence that refute their beliefs. My raison d'etre, if there is one, is to demonstrate that a belief in God and critical thinking are not mutually exclusive. It's not a matter of religion or science, or as many disillusioned Mormons come to believe, Mormonism or nothing. A critical examination of one's core religious beliefs, of course, can be difficult and troubling and painful, as any of us who have gone through a faith crisis can attest. After years of research and study and prayerful analysis, I've come to the conclusion, however, that Mormonism is not what I was taught or once believed that it was. I wish it were otherwise, but wishful thinking and correlated conference talks and inspirational videos can't make it so. Nevertheless, I'm not arrogant enough to believe that those walking in the same path that I have or examining the same evidence that I have will come to the same conclusion that I have. When exploring philosophy or faith or religion, the best we can hope for is to come up with convincing evidence of our point of view rather than proof. Religious beliefs acquired through reason as well as faith are more likely to be accurate and enduring, but it's crucial, regardless of the discomfort or even the heartache that it may bring, to have the courage to seek a reality based on logic and reason rather than emotion or the proverbial burning in the bosom. There's great wisdom found in the words of Edward Abbey, rather a cruel truth than a comfortable delusion. This podcast attempts to apply the principles of critical thinking to Mormonism, as it was preached by its founder, Joseph Smith, as well as past and present leaders and apologists. To the best of my limited abilities, my objective is to provide a greater awareness of the true historicity of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, its doctrines, and its theology. With this goal in mind, I begin today with the 12-part update of the book I wrote back in 2017 based on A Letter to an Apostle. I'm putting together interviews and presentations on other topics that I think you'll find interesting, and we'll add those as they come together. Incidentally, the visual podcast can be viewed on either YouTube, Facebook, or our website, themormonpodcast.org. The audio podcast can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other platforms. Finally, although I've spent most of my working life lecturing and teaching both at the university and through my own training organization, podcasting is new to me, and I therefore ask for your help. Any feedback that you can provide will be appreciated. Please let me know what you find useful about the Mormon Podcast. Where are we failing? How can we make it better? What topics would you like to see us cover? And what guests would you like us to bring on to the Mormon Podcast? You can leave these comments here, or you can email me at themormonpodcast@gmail.com. Okay, with this preamble out of the way, let's look into A Letter to an Apostle. On June 18th, 2017, I wrote to President Dieter Uchtdorf, then second counselor in the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in the hope that he might respond to several specific concerns I had regarding the truth claims of the Mormon Church. Uchtdorf was my choice as I viewed him as one of a very few general authorities with the intelligence and perhaps the courage to address my concerns. A colleague remarked to me that not only would Elder Uchtdorf not respond to my questions, but he would likely never see my letter. Instead, I could expect a form letter response from an underling and perhaps a missive from my stake presidents. Sadly, and it would seem predictably, that's just what happened. I did receive a rather terse form letter, repost from Uchtdorf's secretary, who copied my stake president. It's been 5 years since I wrote to President Uchtdorf, and during this time I've not received any correspondence from him or had any contact with him, or for that matter from my local leadership in the church. I certainly don't take offense at this. I appreciate the fact that in an organization the size of the LDS Church, with 65,000 full-time paid employees, almost half of what is employed at Google or Microsoft, that C-level officials cannot respond personally to every letter that they receive, regardless of the solemnity of the writer. I also accept that perhaps the Church's general authorities may indeed have no answers beyond those that their apologists propagate. Occasionally I've heard an intrepid member muse, do you think that they, that is, the general authorities, believe that the LDS Church is true? Or are they victims of self-delusion, the affluent lifestyle the Church affords them? Or is it about ego and avarice, ignited by all the bowing and scraping of the true believers on the Wasatch Front? In other words, is it fortune in men's eyes that drives them? The late Grant Palmer, author of An Insider's View of Mormon Origins, spoke about several meetings he had with a general authority who told him straight up that he didn't believe that the church was true, and indicated that the apostles all learned within a year or two of being called that the Mormon Church is indeed a fraud. Was Palmer's general authority ill-informed, lying, deluded, or had some axe to grind? Perhaps any or all of these. But having read Grant Palmer's books on the Savior, and knowing of his service to the least among us, inmates in the Utah prison system, I don't question that Grant Palmer was truthful in reporting his conversation. Nevertheless, despite the cynical view that this anecdote suggests, I think it's wrong, or at least premature, to go as far as to assume ignoble motives on the part of all the brethren.